a response from the D2. "Do you want me to go?" I asked her. "No, I want you to stay." Then Bree flipped the tape back on. Chapter 15. A man walked out of the shadows and directly into the frame. The killer? Who else would it be? He'd left us this tape, hadn't he? He wanted us to see it. He wore a plain oatmeal-colored robe and a black and white keffiyeh, and appeared to be incredibly pissed off at the world. He carried an AK-47, which he draped across his lap as he sat to address the camera. Now this was stranger than strange. It took my breath away, actually. The style of video was immediately familiar. We'd all seen tapes like this before, from Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Hamas. My gut tightened another notch. We were about to find out something about our killer, and I was willing to bet it wouldn't be good news.
It is time for the people of the United States to listen for a change,
the man said in heavily accented English. The skin on his cheeks, forehead, and prominent nose was heavily pockmarked. The skin color, mustache, and apparent height matched the eyewitness accounts from that afternoon at the Riverwalk. This was our guy, wasn't it? The one who'd thrown the author Tess Olson 12 stories to her death, and before that seen fit to humiliate her with a dog leash?
Each one of you watching this film is guilty of murder. Each one of you is as guilty as your cowardly president, as guilty as your Congress and your lying Secretary of Defense, certainly as guilty as the pathetic American and British soldiers who defile my streets and kill my people, because you believe that you own the world, and now you will pay with your lives. The blood of Americans will be spilled in America this time, blood that I will spill myself. Make no mistake, there is much that one man can do. Just as none of you are innocent, now none of you are safe.
The man got up and approached the camera, staring out at us as if he could see right into the den. Then he beamed with the most horrific smile. A second later, the screen went back to static. "Christ," Sampson said into the ensuing silence. "What the hell was that crazy piece of shit? Who was that maniac?" Just as Bree was reaching for the stop button, another image came up on the screen. "A double feature," said Sampson. "Man believes in giving us our money's worth anyway." Chapter 16. At first it was a blur, someone standing in front of the camera. When he stepped back, we saw that it was the same man, only now dressed in plain green coveralls and a black baseball cap that said M.O. The scene was obviously Tess Olson's living room. Today, Mrs. Olson was in the background on all fours, naked and visibly trembling. Her mouth was taped shut, and around her neck was the red dog leash. He had filmed everything, playing to an audience the whole time he was here. The feeling in the den went from bad to a lot worse. The killer, or the terrorist, as I'd already begun to think of him, approached Tess Olson. He pulled hard on the leash as she struggled to her feet. The woman was sobbing uncontrollably. Possibly she knew what was going to happen now. Did that mean she knew the killer? How would she know him? Because of a book she was writing? What was her latest project? Seconds later, the man had pulled her out on the terrace. He first peeled, then ripped the tape off her mouth. We couldn't hear much from this distance, not until he grabbed Mrs. Olson and hung her over the edge. Then her piercing screams reached the camera's microphone, which was set up maybe 20 feet away. All the while, the killer kept checking over his shoulder, looking toward the camera every few seconds. "See that? How he moved back into the frame?" Bree said. "He wasn't just putting on a show for the crowd on the street. This was meant for us as well. For whoever found the tape, anyway. Look at the bastard's face." Now he was smiling. Even from this distance, his eerie grin was clear and unmistakable. The next few seconds seemed to stretch on forever, as I'm sure they did for Tess Olson. He pulled her back inside and then set her down on the floor. Did she think there would be a reprieve? That she was to be spared? Her shoulders heaved once, then she began to cry again. A minute or so later, he brought her out on the terrace again. "Here it comes," Bree said gravely. "I don't want to watch this." But she did. We all did. The killer was a powerful man, probably over 6 feet tall and well-built. He shocked me by lifting Tess Olson like a barbell straight up over his head. He looked back at the camera one more time. "Yes, you bastard, we're watching," then winked, and threw her off the balcony. "My God," Bree whispered. "Did he just wink at us?" He didn't leave the terrace, though, or the picture frame. I could see by the angle of his head that he wasn't looking straight down to where she fell. He was looking out at his audience, at the people down on the street. He was taking chances that he didn't need to take. In the scheme of things, that was good for us. Maybe that's how we'd find him. Catch this bastard, because he was reckless and liked to preen in front of an audience. Then I analyzed my own thought. We, not they, were going to get this son of a bitch. And then the killer spoke to the camera, and this was the eeriest part of all.
You can try to capture me, but you will fail, Dr. Cross.
Sampson, Bree, and I turned to one another. John and I were speechless, and all Bree could manage was, "Holy shit, Alex." Ready or not, I was back in the game. Chapter 17. Well, I wasn't ready. Not yet, anyway. 4 days after the Riverwalk murder, I was thinking about my patients. I was already conflicted, though. I was trying not to focus on Tess Olson's murder, and who the maniac killer might be, and how he could possibly know me, and what the hell he wanted from me. I couldn't help starting my day by checking the latest news on WashingtonPost.com. Nothing further had happened during the night, thank God. No more murders, so at least he wasn't on a spree. The morning sessions would keep me on my toes anyway. It was my biggest day of the week, the one I looked forward to, but also dreaded in some ways. There was always the hope that I might do somebody some good, have a breakthrough, or possibly I could fall right on my ass. It started at 7 with a recently widowed D.C. firefighter who was in conflict between a sense of duty to his job and kids and a growing sense of meaninglessness about life that produced daily thoughts of suicide. At 8, I saw a Desert Storm vet who was still wrestling with demons he'd brought home from the war. He was a referral from my own therapist, Adele Finley, and I was hopeful that I could help him eventually. Still, this was the crisis stage of his treatment, so it was too early to tell if we were really communicating. Next came a woman whose postpartum depression had left her with a lot of ambivalence toward her 6-month-old daughter. We discussed her little girl and even talked about my feelings, just for a minute, about Damon possibly heading off to prep school. Same as in police work, I was usually unorthodox in the sessions. I was there to talk to people, and I talked freely, for the most part. I had a half-hour break, during which I checked in with Bree, then glanced at the news on WashingtonPost.com again. Still nothing new. No further attacks, no explanations for the death of Tess Olson. The morning's final patient was a Georgetown law student whose misophobia had become so intense she'd begun incinerating her own underwear every night. Quite a morning. Satisfying in a strange way, and relatively safe. At least for me. Chapter 18. Bree called the office while I was eating an unbuttered hard roll before my 1 o'clock. "We did some close-up work on the tapes," she said. "Tell me what you think of this, Alex. There's a scar on the killer's forehead, shape of a half-moon. It's fairly pronounced." I thought for a moment before answering. Could mean head trauma at some time. This is a shot in the dark, but he could have damaged frontal lobes. People with frontal lobe damage can display bad tempers and impulsiveness. "Thanks, Doc," Bree said. "Nice having you on the team." I was on the team? Since when? Had I agreed to that? I didn't think so. After lunch, and the very nice homicide case chat with Bree, I had my last client of the day, also my favorite, a woman in her mid-30s named Sandy Quinlan. Sandy was a recent transplant to D.C. from small-town life in northern Michigan, not far from Canada. She'd accepted an inner-city teaching job in Southeast, which had endeared her to me immediately. Unfortunately, Sandy didn't like herself very much. "I'll bet you have a dozen clients like me. All these lonely, depressed, single women in the big, bad city?" Actually, I don't. I told her the truth. A terrible habit with me. "You're my only DSW in the BBC." Sandy got the joke and smiled, then went on. "Well, it's just pathetic. Nearly every woman I know is looking for the same dumbass thing." "Happiness?" I asked. I was going to say a man. Or a woman, I suppose. Somebody to love. I definitely saw a different person in Sandy than she saw in herself. She chose to appear as the classic loner stereotype. Nice looks hidden behind black-rimmed glasses and dark, baggy clothes. As she'd grown comfortable with me, she'd proven to be personable, interesting, and funny when she wanted to be. And she cared deeply about the children she taught. She talked about them frequently and in the warmest terms. No ambivalence whatsoever. "I have a real hard time seeing you as pathetic," I finally said to her. "Sorry, it's just an opinion. I could be all wrong about that." "Well, when your therapist is probably your best friend, call it what you want." Before I could respond, she laughed self-consciously. "Don't worry, I don't mean that as psycho as it sounds. I just mean that—" My human impulse was to reach out to her, but as a therapist, I couldn't. Or shouldn't, anyway. There was something in her eyes, though. They were so needy that I couldn't help having a dual response. I wanted her to know that I cared about how she did, and I wanted to make sure that our relationship was clear. Maybe Sandy's tone in that expectant glance of hers hadn't meant anything. Then again, everything means something, or so I've read in a lot of very thick books used at schools like Georgetown and Johns Hopkins. I'd have to be careful with Sandy. We got through the session okay, and once she left, I was done for the day. Or was I? Did I have a second job to go to now? I was just coming down the stairs of my building when my cell rang. I didn't recognize the number. Now what? I put the phone to my ear.
I'm calling for Kyle Craig.
He was breaking up some, but had my full attention.
He can't come to the phone right now because he's in solitary confinement in Colorado, but he wanted you to know he's thinking about you every day. And he has a surprise planned for you. A terrific surprise right there in Washington, D.C. Remember, Kyle is the man with the plan. Oh, and he also wants you to know that he hasn't seen the sun in 4 years. And it's made him stronger and better at what he does.
The phone went dead in my hand. Kyle Craig. Jesus. What next? And what was that message supposed to mean? He has a surprise planned for you. Chapter 19. I tried to tell myself that I couldn't spend a lot of time worrying about the homicidal maniacs I had already put away in jail. Not when some others were still walking free. Besides, nobody had ever come close to breaking out of ADX Florence, and this wasn't the first time Craig had threatened me from his jail cell. Besides, I wasn't on the job anymore. Of course, I was going out with the head detective on a very big, very nasty case. The Riverwalk homicide was already a media sensation. Everybody seemed to be talking about it. Even my patients had brought it up. The more hysterical news outlets spun some absurd theory every couple of hours. They were selling fear 24/7, doing a brisk business, and I had to admit I dealt with that particular commodity myself. Except that I tried to relieve the fear, as best I could anyway. I had always attempted